Glitchtrap is a character whose identity doesn't have a clear consensus in the FNAF community. He was first introduced in Help Wanted, as an anomaly within the Freddy Fazbear Virtual Experience, who managed to escape by transferring his digital consciousness from the game into the mind of a young woman named Vanessa. Glitchtrap would continue to be the overarching antagonist of every game following Help Wanted, all the way up until Help Wanted 2, which is the last time we see him. So, who is he? He definitely bears a striking resemblance to series antagonist William Afton, with how he behaves in his Spring Bonnie persona. But other evidence suggests that he's more than just William Afton himself. He also seems to share a large connection to the Mimic, the series' new primary antagonist who just got a game explaining his backstory and origins. So what is Glitchtrap? Why does he act like Afton but also seems to be something more? That's what we're here to talk about today. I want to cruise through a list of candidates who people believe might be the identity of Glitchtrap, and then, at the end of the video, provide what I think is a unique solution to the identity of Glitchtrap. So, let's get started. Candidate 1. William Afton himself. William is obviously the first and most obvious candidate for Glitchtrap's identity. I mean, Glitchtrap is clearly connected to Afton in multiple ways. First, his appearance. Glitchtrap appears as a version of Spring Bonnie, specifically a man wearing a suit, since in the game files of Help Wanted, he is internally called Spring Bonnie Man. He also has a large connection to the color purple, obviously his purple bow tie, but he also has purple-colored vest, and more importantly, purple-colored eyes, which is something normal Spring Bonnie doesn't have. This close association with the color purple obviously connects him back to William Afton, since William Afton is always portrayed with the color purple in mind. Glitchtrap also says things that William Afton would say, such as his popular catchphrase, "I always come back." And at the end of the pizza party level in Help Wanted, Glitchtrap is shown luring the player into a back room before stuffing them into Freddy Fazbear, just like William Afton did in the missing children's incident. In Help Wanted 2, we see that Glitchtrap has memories of William Afton's victims. Glitchtrap is shown to have 6 dolls of William Afton's victims, which include the original 5 missing children and the puppet. All of these dolls are described as Glitchtrap's memories in the game. More interestingly, the memory dolls have small patches on them, which seems to imply that Glitchtrap remembers how Afton's victims might have been killed. An additional piece of evidence the real William Afton is involved with Glitchtrap is the Staffbot family table located in Security Breach. This table of Staffbots seems to resemble the Afton family. William and his wife are represented by the Magician and the Nanny Staffbot. The Circus Baby Staffbot obviously represents Elizabeth Afton, the Worker Bot represents Mike, and the Headless Staffbot most likely represents the bite victim due to obvious reasons. Considering all this is set up in an area that Vanny is shown to have access to, and Glitchtrap is in control of Vanny, this implies that Glitchtrap remembers William Afton's family, something that only the real William Afton should remember. All of this seems to be a dead ringer for William Afton, right? Yet, some problems do arise if this is actually William Afton as a ghost inside the machine. You see, in Help Wanted, the game makes it clear how Glitchtrap got into the Freddy Fazbear Virtual Experience. This was through vintage control boards that were being scanned into the game.
Using proprietary technology developed by Fazbear Entertainment, our VR development teams were able to use vintage control boards almost like plug and play, digitally recreating performances and personalities from the past in an instant.
It was only after this happened that Glitchtrap began appearing inside the VR game. Now, in the past, some people have believed that the circuit boards that were scanned into the game came from Scraptrap, and that William Afton's soul would have been on those circuit boards. However, this idea doesn't really work in the way most people think it does. In Help Wanted, we are told the reason that the vintage circuit boards were scanned into the Freddy Fazbear Virtual Experience was for pathfinding.
I mean, they sent us that stuff in the first place with no explanation, told us to scan it, said it would expedite the process so we wouldn't need to program any pathfinding ourselves. It was a budget thing, I guess. It was just junk. Circuit boards and things like that. Looked pretty old. Somehow, though, there was usable code on some of it. It seemed to take hold by itself. Things started changing. But then, he started appearing.
In video game development, pathfinding has to do with creating an algorithm that enables a game character to move from one point to another by following a programmed path in the game. Like how in FNAF 1, the animatronics are programmed to take specific paths to get to the player's office. The issue here is that in Help Wanted, Scraptrap isn't a character in the game. None of the Scrap animatronics are in the game. Pizzeria Simulator isn't even featured in Help Wanted at all. Only FNAF 1 through 4 and Sister Location are playable levels in the game. So why would Fazbear use circuit boards from the animatronics in Pizzeria Simulator if none of those animatronics actually appear in the game? This puts a huge wrench in the idea that William's spirit was scanned through the circuit boards in Help Wanted. Not to mention, all of the Pizzeria Simulator animatronics seemingly burned in the fire. Until a proper explanation exists as to how William's soul managed to get into the circuit boards that they were scanned into Help Wanted, this makes it unlikely that Afton himself is Glitchtrap. Although, the two have a very powerful connection that needs to be kept in mind for later in this video. Our second candidate is F10N4. Now, Glitchtrap's identity being the Mimic is something that's been circling the internet for a while. However, with the release of Secret of the Mimic, this mystery has gotten more complicated, since now it is confirmed that there are two versions of the Mimic that exists. The first version is the Mimic called M1. This was the original version of the Mimic created by Edwin Murray to babysit his son David. However, after Edwin's wife died in a tragic fire at an unknown event known as Fallfest, M1, the original Mimic, began to mimic Fiona's identity and voice, to the point where it actually began to believe that it was really Fiona. Later on, David Murray died, and M1 ended up convincing Edwin Murray to build another Mimic. This one would be to replace David. However, Edwin became disillusioned by the idea and realized that M1 wasn't really his wife, and that the second Mimic that he built, called M2, wasn't really his son David. At some point, M1 was removed from her endoskeleton body and put into a large supercomputer called F10M4, which is leet speech for Fiona. Anyways, some people believe that F10N4, previously M1, who I'm just going to be calling Fiona for my own sanity, might actually be the identity of Glitchtrap, since she's a version of the Mimic that exists purely as an AI rather than an endoskeleton like M2. Glitchtrap is able to mimic the voice of Tape Girl in Help Wanted, something that Fiona does in Secret of the Mimic since she's mimicking the dispatch's voice.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Another thing is that Fiona is specifically the M1 version of the Mimic AI. In the Tales from the Pizzaplex universe, which is a separate continuity from the games, but does share many similarities, the Mimic 1 AI is the one responsible for everything going wrong in the Pizzaplex. Specifically, the Glamrock animatronic's personalities changing. This is something that Glitchtrap is responsible for in the game version of events.
I got another message from the techs at the Pizzaplex. I'm afraid it's about you again. The techs have been struggling to fix some serious glitches with the robots. I'm not sure what exactly is wrong, except that it's making the robots more eerie than entertaining. You like that? Eerie instead of entertaining? Thanks, but it's really not that funny. Apparently, the glitch extended beyond the robots. It went system-wide. It began infecting all the machines.
Despite this evidence, however, there are, once again, some problems that arise from Glitchtrap being Fiona. First, it has to do with Glitchtrap's actions and motivations. Whatever Glitchtrap is, he is going out of his way to do things that William Afton would do. He behaves like Afton, continuing to use the Spring Bonnie persona even after he escapes the Freddy Fazbear Virtual Experience. He then possesses Vanessa and uses her to create the Vanny costume, and then has her wear the Vanny costume to lure and capture multiple children, just like William Afton did while wearing the Spring Bonnie suit all those decades ago. He also has Vanny build Burntrap, who is a recreation of Afton in the most literal sense possible. Also, in the official FNAF Dead by Daylight crossover, Glitchtrap is a legendary skin for Springtrap that can be unlocked. Now, it is confirmed that Glitchtrap in Dead by Daylight isn't technically the original Glitchtrap from Help Wanted. Instead, it's a version of Glitchtrap that was actually a copy created by the entity. In Dead by Daylight, Glitchtrap is characterized as taking great joy in hunting down and killing survivors, even laughing while he does it. And it was confirmed that Scott Cawthon himself was heavily involved with the Dead by Daylight crossover, and he approved things that went into it. And to me, this seems like an accurate representation of Glitchtrap's character. He also gleefully dances around after luring the player and stuffing them inside Freddy in the pizza party ending. And also by proxy, he behaves this way through Vanny in Security Breach. This is just not how Fiona behaves. Now, obviously Fiona isn't a morally good person, but the most important thing to Fiona is getting her son David back. That is all that she wants. The reason she does everything she does in Secret of the Mimic is to turn M2 back into David, and stop him from mindlessly killing people who enter the MCM. If Glitchtrap was Fiona, why would she be doing all these things that only benefit Afton? Fiona cares about David. That's all that truly matters to her.
We must convince him to repair M2. That is all that I want. If you do not, M2 will never stop pursuing you.
Glitchtrap is portrayed as a very cruel and sinister being. He invades the mind of an innocent woman like Vanessa, taking over her life and forcing her to obey his orders, threatening to torture her and possibly break her fingers with a thumbscrew in FNAF AR if she doesn't listen. He then makes Vanessa into another William Afton, having her create a rabbit suit and use it to lure and kill 9 children by the time of Security Breach. All of this just isn't something Fiona would do. It doesn't align with her goals at all. She's a morally corrupt AI, yes, but her ultimate goal is to turn M2 from a violent monster back into her son so they could be a family again. All this extra death is meaningless to her. In Help Wanted 2, it's revealed in that game's story that the Helpy digital AI that exists inside the Vanny network is either working with or is Glitchtrap himself, which is implied by the fact that Glitchtrap's hand is called Helptrap in the bad ending of the game files. And in Princess Quest IV's ending to the game, Helpy disappears from the projector after Glitchtrap has been destroyed by Vanny. We know that canonically from here, Helpy then manipulates Cassie into using the Vanny mask to shut down Mexus, which was guarding the Mimic from escaping under the Pizzaplex, and allows the Mimic to get free. So Glitchtrap did have a hand in freeing the Mimic, who is still in a violent and murderous state. Glitchtrap's actions and personality just really don't align with anything that Fiona wants. He's definitely serving his own agenda. So yeah, to me, I don't think personally Fiona herself is using the Glitchtrap persona. Now, this doesn't mean that Fiona is irrelevant. I definitely think she is, especially with the inclusion of the Candy Cadet stories in Help Wanted 2. One of the stories being about a witch in a dark forest. And in Secret of the Mimic, in Moon.exe, we see that Fiona's digital avatar is the Sun Witch, who lives in a cabin in the dark forest. Fiona and Glitchtrap very likely have some kind of connection. That could be true. My point is that Fiona herself isn't just being Glitchtrap. Glitchtrap looks, acts, talks just like William Afton, and his ultimate goal is to continue Afton's legacy. Not to mention, he has the memories of Afton's victims, including Charlie, and apparently how those victims died. Finally, we have our third candidate for Glitchtrap's identity, M2, the other Mimic, the endoskeleton version of the Mimic that is the main antagonist of Secret of the Mimic and in Ruin. There's actually a surprising amount of connections between Glitchtrap and M2. First, visual parallels. M2 actually heavily parallels Glitchtrap in the bad ending of Secret of the Mimic. In the bad ending of Secret of the Mimic, Arnold hands over the data diver to the fake dispatch, only for it to be revealed that he had been tricked the whole time, and the real dispatch has been trying to contact him all night. Arnold is then fired for giving the data diver up, and it's then revealed that M2 has been hiding in the back of Arnold's van. It then attacks him, and the game ends with Arnold being stuffed inside a Freddy suit, performing on the stage as the Mimic watches in the audience. This parallels Help Wanted's pizza party ending. In both these endings, the player character is killed and stuffed into a Freddy animatronic, and they then perform on stage as Freddy in a version of the FNAF 1 pizzeria, while their killer stands in the audience. These two endings mirror each other, with the only difference being that one is Glitchtrap in the audience while the other is M2. This shows that Glitchtrap and the Mimic are connected since they mirror each other. In Help Wanted 2, the same game that connects Glitchtrap to the Mimic by having Glitchtrap be responsible for freeing the Mimic by proxy, we are also shown in the Help Wanted 2 update that Glitchtrap has a memory doll of David's white tiger. This is huge since this is an object that is not just related to David Murray, but M2 as well. Remember that M2 was supposed to be a mimicked version of David Murray after his death. And in one of the alternate endings to Secret of the Mimic, M2 has this very exact tiger plush. Also, there was a teaser for Help Wanted which showed an old endoskeleton head called Origin, which seems to imply that this is where the Mimic program came from in Help Wanted. While M2 does have some strong connections to Glitchtrap, there are of course still some issues. We can see in Ruin that the Mimic endoskeleton is obviously not mimicking William Afton. On top of that, if Glitchtrap is Helpy, which is very likely that he could be, he and the Mimic endoskeleton are then shown to be arguing in Ruin, implying that they are separate entities. Glitchtrap was working with the Mimic, but it's clear that they have to be different entities, since M2 is still mimicking Edwin's rage and violence by the time of Ruin. So we know that M2 never started mimicking Afton. Well, those are all the primary candidates for Glitchtrap's identity, according to the FNAF community. However, it seems like all of them have some type of flaw that prevents them from definitively being the Glitchtrap identity. So notice how a trend that seems to be happening between the two versions of the Mimic that we are shown, M1 and M2, is that the Mimic is locked into a specific persona. So what else is there? Well, what did Scott Cawthon himself have to say about the character of Glitchtrap?
I love the character. And I know that this is kind of one of the places where I know there's a little bit of a divide with maybe me and the fan base, or maybe just within the fan base, because I always lean sci-fi. I have a tendency to lean sci-fi, even though I try to come back into the roots of the supernatural instead. But I can't help my inclinations to lean sci-fi. So anything that involves possession of AI or possession of machines or circuitry, that I love that sort of thing. So I love the idea of Glitchtrap.
So Scott seems to have an inclination to lean towards sci-fi elements, but also try to root them back into the supernatural. This is something he did back in Sister Location, with the game largely being based on sci-fi elements and then mixing in supernatural ones as well. So I think it's fair to say that the same thought process went into Glitchtrap. But how exactly? I want to bring up an alternative option to this equation of Glitchtrap's identity that is definitely unorthodox, to say the least. For this last section of the video, I want to talk about Return to the Pit. Yes, I know, the book that everyone hates because of how unapologetically goofy and unhinged it is. Believe me, I understand. But this book matters. It matters a lot, because a discovery was made that connects this book to the modern FNAF story, and Glitchtrap as well. In Return to the Pit, Oswald is being antagonized by the Yellow Rabbit, an entity that looks like Spring Bonnie, but behaves like William Afton. This is because the Yellow Rabbit was infected by the memories and agony of William Afton and his crimes, which gave it sentience. In a secret ending to Return to the Pit, Oswald finds an arcade machine and is transported into an 8-bit style arcade world. In this 8-bit world, Oswald gives cake to 5 missing children at the party table. Doing this actually causes the Yellow Rabbit entity to be destroyed. Why does this matter? Because this ending in Return to the Pit is extremely similar to the Princess Quest IV ending in Help Wanted 2. I'll make a list of all the similarities these two endings have. In the secret ending of Return to the Pit, Oswald acts out a recreation of what is definitely Happiest Day from FNAF 3, which results in the Yellow Rabbit entity being destroyed once it's finished. In Help Wanted 2, we also act out a semi-recreation of Happiest Day with the memory dolls, whose design even matches the Happiest Day spirits. We do this by lighting up the graves of the memory dolls, which according to the game, frees them, like how we free the spirits in Happiest Day, and by doing this, it results in Glitchtrap being able to be destroyed. There's way more. In both the secret ending to Return to the Pit and Princess Quest IV's ending in Help Wanted 2, both happen by the player literally entering an arcade machine. In Return to the Pit, Oswald plays and then enters the 8-bit arcade machine, which then transports him into the game's world, which allows him to recreate Happiest Day and kill the Yellow Rabbit. In Help Wanted 2, the player enters the Princess Quest IV arcade machine to recreate Happiest Day by releasing the memory dolls, which ends up allowing Glitchtrap to be killed. Another thing, both endings in both Return to the Pit and Help Wanted 2 require the player to have a special token to play them. In Return to the Pit, Oswald uncovers half the play token, which he can later find the other half after playing the game again, which allows him to play the arcade machine. In Help Wanted 2, Princess Quest IV can only be played once the player is given a special token by Mystic Hippo at the end of the game. This execution of these two endings is so incredibly similar that I think it means something, specifically when it comes to Glitchtrap. The Yellow Rabbit in Return to the Pit, and Into the Pit by extension, is extremely similar to Glitchtrap. I think Glitchtrap is an entity created by the memories and agony of William Afton, like the Yellow Rabbit is, hence why he behaves like Afton and says things William Afton would say. Since Glitchtrap has information about William Afton that the Mimic wouldn't have any way of learning by itself, since the VR game it was in has no instance of Afton saying "I always come back," and it doesn't show any representation of Charlie's death or the other MCI victims. Heck, in one of the most criticized and goofy endings of Return to the Pit, the Yellow Rabbit makes Oswald put on bunny ears, which somehow mind controls him into joining the Yellow Rabbit's family. Yes, this is a real ending in the book. A Yellow Rabbit entity that controls people and makes them look like a bunny. It kinda sounds like what Glitchtrap does to Vanessa a little bit. But maybe I'm thinking too deep into such a comedic ending. Anyways, I think Glitchtrap is a version of the Mimic program that has William Afton's memories and agony attached to it, similar to the Yellow Rabbit. This perfectly explains why Glitchtrap is completely devoted to the Afton persona, and does things William Afton would do. An extra detail that makes me think Glitchtrap and the Yellow Rabbit are similar creatures is that in Princess Quest, Glitchtrap appears as a dark blob, with multiple agonized faces inside of his body, 2 streams of dark purple tears flowing down his eyes. And on the cover of the original Into the Pit book, and the ending of the Into the Pit game, the Yellow Rabbit is also shown to have dark tear tracks streaming from its eyes as well. These dark streaming tears seem to be a sign of something being infected by agony in the FNAF universe. And I mean, look at this thing. It looks like it's in agony, or it's enjoying itself, or both. Basically, if it looks like a yellow rabbit, talks like a yellow rabbit, acts like a yellow rabbit, and dies like a yellow rabbit, it's probably haunted by the memories and agony of William Afton. This is a smaller section I decided to add, since I think it reinforces the idea that Glitchtrap was created from agony. I want to talk about one of the strangest Fazbear Fright stories, In the Flesh. Yes, I know In the Flesh is the story about a game developer who literally gets infected by a virtual Springtrap, only to then have an infant Springtrap burst out of his body alien style. Look, all strangeness aside, I think this story actually exists to tell us something about Glitchtrap. In this story, a game developer named Matt is working on a virtual reality game for a Five Nights at Freddy's franchise. In the story, the game Matt is working on is called Springtrap's Revenge, and it has Springtrap as the central antagonist. At some point in the story, Matt's body ends up getting infected by the VR Springtrap, and he comes into the real world. Now, already, this premise is extremely similar to Help Wanted, a version of Springtrap from a VR game that infects someone who's playing the game and then escapes into the real world. In fact, similarities between Glitchtrap and the VR Springtrap are so apparent that most of the official guidebooks in the franchise list Glitchtrap as being in this story. But more than that, it's how the virtual Springtrap was created by Matt in the story, because I think it brings this theory together perfectly. He had watched dozens of classic horror movies, using the personalities of their cold-blooded killers. He read books and articles on serial killers, about how their appetite for violence could only be sated for a little while, until they had to choose another victim. The more Matt watched and read, the more he understood. For the killers who lived on in people's imaginations, murder was a source of joy, a means of self-expression, like painting for an artist or playing an instrument for a musician. Matt wanted Springtrap to show this kind of joy, this kind of deep self-realization in the art of killing. He wanted to create a character who could open your jugular with the same happy excitement as a child opening a birthday present. Matt was no murderer. Of course, if he were, he wouldn't have had to do so much research. But Matt knew what it was to feel rage, to feel so wronged, so ill-used, that he burned with the desire to destroy, to smash, to teach people who had wronged him a lesson they would never forget. During the game's development, Springtrap became the place Matt could put all these feelings. a repository for all his destructive urges. Springtrap was the child of Matt's rage. This right here, this is the smoking gun. We have a character who's coding a virtual version of Springtrap into acting like a serial killer, and then blatantly we are told that the VR Springtrap in this story was born from Matt's rage, his agony and pain. This is why he is able to come to life in the story, because Matt's rage and frustration are infecting Springtrap's code. People infecting things using their rage and the agony from that rage bringing things to life is a common occurrence in Fazbear Frights, since both Andrew and William Afton himself do the exact same thing in the Man in Room 1280. And for those of you who might think that Glitchtrap and VR Springtrap from In the Flesh aren't connected, I want to point out that back in June of 2019, we got the Freddy Files Updated Edition. And at the very end of that book, we got teaser art for a virtual version of Springtrap, just like Scrap Baby was teased at the end of the Freddy Files when FNAF 6 was coming out. And guess what? This teaser art was later confirmed to be artwork of VR Springtrap from In the Flesh. This proves my point that In the Flesh is important, since out of all the Fazbear Fright stories to get teaser art, In the Flesh was the one to get teased at the end of the Freddy Files, a book which, might I add, released only a month after Help Wanted released, so Glitchtrap was an extremely popular topic at the time. So this was showing us that VR Springtrap was relevant during the release of Help Wanted. But a looming question remains. How did William Afton's memories and agony manage to infect the Mimic program in Help Wanted? Well, I think I have a viable explanation. And the answer is Helpy. So earlier, I mentioned that one of the things that prevents William Afton from being in Help Wanted was because that neither Scraptrap nor any of the characters from Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator are in Help Wanted, making it extremely unlikely that any of the circuit boards that were used in Help Wanted came from those characters. So then, how could Afton's agony get into Help Wanted? Well, I wanted to briefly talk about the Fazbear Frights story, The Man in Room 1280. In the Fazbear Frights timeline, after William Afton burned in the fire at the end of FNAF 6, his body was taken to Heracles Hospital, where he continued to be tormented by that story's vengeful spirit character, Andrew. At the end of the story, William Afton's body gets taken to the Fazbear Entertainment Distribution Center. William's chest then explodes, and his agony spreads and infects all the nearby objects in the facility. This allows Afton to escape his torment. What I'm proposing is that a similar event in the Fazbear Frights also happened in the game timeline. After Golden Freddy leaves Ultimate Custom Night, William Afton spread his agony among the ruins of the FNAF 6 location. And his agony infected one specific object, Helpy, who we know was sitting on Mike's desk in that game. In Help Wanted 2, there's a drawing depicting what appears to be Helpy running away from the FNAF 6 fire. This might imply that Helpy survived the fire during FNAF 6, and through his survival, his circuitry that we see in Help Wanted 2 was scanned into the Freddy Fazbear Virtual Experience. Since Helpy is actually the only Pizzeria Simulator character in Help Wanted, and he appears multiple times in that game, including several Easter egg appearances, which seems to imply that he is important to the story of that game. This might explain how William's agony and his memories managed to find its way into Help Wanted. They spread through Helpy after he was put into the game, and then they infected the Mimic program that was being used in the game as well, which would lead to the creation of Glitchtrap. This would also explain why, out of all the characters in Help Wanted 2, the Helpy AI is the character that's shown to be connected to Glitchtrap. And that, I believe, is the true identity of Glitchtrap. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and I will see you on the flip side.